Welcome pilots, my name is Hybrid V, and today I wanted to talk with you all about my experience with the static server meshing test that we recently had in the tech preview channel. Now, if you're not already aware, I am an Evocati, that is a hand-picked player that gets to play a lot of very early builds before they come in. So for example, if a new patch comes in, or in this case, a tech preview comes in and it's Evocati only, that means I get to actually test it and play on it. However, we were always bound by an NDA, so I never really ever talked about my experience because, again, it was all under NDA, so I never really brought it up. But now CIG have recently changed some policies to allow some open-ended disclosures and allow us to kind of relay our experiences and thoughts on our playtests that we're going through. They are also now publishing patch notes for Evocati tests. In this case, for example, the static server meshing test has a patch note for it. So if you want to check that out, there will be a link in the description below for you to check out that patch note. But yeah, we can now talk about it. We just cannot share any type of media. So everything you're seeing in the background here is not of the actual playtest. It is of the Idris Wargame event that happened on live. It's just a hodgepodge of footage I had recorded, and it's all mashed together just to be some background footage while I talk about my experiences. First, we need to talk about what server meshing is. Of course, if you want to skip past this part because you already know it, there's going to be time codes on the bottom. You can jump straight past it. But for those of you that are still new, server meshing and what it means for Star Citizen is massive. So this is a huge milestone for Star Citizen. If you're not already aware, CIG have been working on server meshing this far back as 2017, probably 2016, I think. I don't remember. I think it was 2017. I think they were really buckling down on it. But overall, it's been in development for a long time, and many other games have like kind of similar forms of server meshing. I know Sea of Thieves has like a similar type of system, but it's not on the scale of what Star Citizen is doing. Remember, folks, the servers right now currently are monitoring millions, if not billions of assets, right? We're talking about entities as small as like having a water bottle for your character or even a candy bar, all the way to the interior of an Idris and all the players inside it, all the ships flying around in combat and everything like that. All that is being tracked by a server. This is the reason why when you maybe play on a weekend and it's really, really populated, it tends to really, really bog down the performance of the server to the point where maybe you're having issues with your character's inventory or just all kinds of weird oddities with physics and stuff like that. It's because it's all being tracked by a singular server. And server meshing is going to help alleviate that to a large degree by, instead of having one server track it, it can be distributed amongst multiple servers. So for example, instead of having that Idris you're on be tracked by the entire server as a large whole, you could have, say, a separate server track the interior of that Idris, and that just helps performance altogether. Now, what we're testing here is static server meshing. So what that means is one large server is talking to another large server. In this case, what we had was Stanton and Pyro, and they were talking to each other, and they were governing their each individual systems. And that's how static server meshing is going to work in the future. If you want to go, say, from Stanton and take a jump point to Pyro, you will be from one server, and then you would take the jump point, it would do like a little bit of a handshake, and then you would transfer to a brand new server, and now you'd be in Pyro, and it would all be seamless. So that's the point of static server meshing. Eventually, we'll get something like dynamic server meshing, which will do like what I talked about earlier. So for example, let's say we had a Bengal carrier. A smaller server could potentially be used to track that Bengal carrier's interior rather than it being the entire server as a whole that you're on tracking it, right? And that, again, will improve performance. But for right now, static server meshing is mostly going to be used, at least in the near future, for tracking individual systems and kind of, governing the handshake process between the systems going in between. So for example, if I wanted to go from Pyro to Stanton to Nyx, those would be 3 separate servers. I would go from Pyro, take the jump point. I would then handshake and connect with Stanton. I am now in Stanton. I am now connected to Stanton. I come to Stanton and I'm in that server there. I fly, do my business there, and then I take the jump point to Nyx, that system over there. And I will then be taking a handshake again and be connecting to that server. And I'm now in that Nyx server or Magnus or whatever it is, Terra, anything like that. So there's going to be large governing servers for each individual system, right? And that's just essentially the basis for static. And then dynamic, of course, can get a lot more granular. I believe static can also get more granular, but dynamic allows them to spool smaller servers up for smaller things on the fly, essentially, whereas static is essentially just that. It's static. It can be used to govern smaller things if they want, but it is just there all the time. And dynamic means it can come in when they need it. So for example, if nobody's at a gas cloud and there's a server governing that gas cloud, the dynamic system can actually shut that down and keep that all stowed away for later, whereas if it's static, it's always up. But that I may be oversimplified. I may not even be explaining it well. I'm not a network engineer. Just the research I went through kind of explained that's kind of how it was supposed to be. If any of you are like network engineers or you have a little bit of experience with that and you can kind of Eli 5 that for folks, I would really appreciate that if you leave a comment down below. I'll be sure to highlight that as well. All right, so with that spiel out of the way, let's actually talk about the actual static server meshing test. Was it actually a success? Well, I don't actually know because CIG has to let us know, of course. In my opinion, it was because it worked out really well. It behaved exactly as I would expect it. There was really nothing to write home about. So let's talk about what happened. So I went in and I logged in and I chose to go to Stanton instead of Pyro, mostly because, well, I know everybody was probably going to go to Pyro just because it's Pyro. And I wanted to contribute and be sure that there was a healthy distribution of players between Stanton and Pyro. So I went to Stanton. I went and just loaded up a basically tutorial mission. I created my character, did the tutorial mission, went in Stanton. So it put me in Microtech. And I just went about and did my business. And I really had nothing really to write about. There were some weird little issues with the actual tutorial mission that I did, but I think that is just a bug with the mission. I don't think that was server related. At least I don't think it was. The server FPS was actually really good at the time. I was monitoring the performance, and my concern was that it was just all going to fall apart because it was the first test they were doing. And I was genuinely surprised at how stable things were. And to my knowledge, talking to other Evos, it was also very stable for them when they were in Pyro as well. One of the things I noticed is that in our chat, it was just the Stanton chat. We could not communicate with players in Pyro. We had our own chat. And so everybody, as far as I can tell, had a wonderful experience. There was really nothing much to write home about. I went and I did the tutorial. I then went and spawned my ship at Tressler and just started flying around and doing stuff and just kind of playing as if it was live. And I just kind of meandered and went around and did my business, and things performed pretty well. Initially, the servers were at a pretty high frame rate. Eventually, it dropped from like 30 FPS, which is the max, to like 25 FPS and 20 FPS. Eventually, it kind of evened out at about like 15 FPS, which is still better than what we're experiencing now, right? It's still not the ideal. We still want servers to be at 30 FPS, which is the standard CIG wants, but right now, currently, I mean, in live, it doesn't hit that. And the fact that it hit that in the static meshing test is a pretty good thing, I would say. Of course, we were not putting as much stress as we wanted to because when I first got into the server, I noticed that there was only 50 player caps on the server, and I think it was the same for Pyro. We're used to having hundreds of players, or at least 100 players. I believe that's the current cap. I think it kind of fluctuates, but currently right now, it's about roughly 100, give or take. And we only had 50, so that probably contributed to overall the positive net that we had there, which was the better performance. That probably was part of that, having only 50 players. That still meant that we could run into 30Ks though, having 50 players. I mean, it's players at the end of the day. And indeed, we had a 30K. I was on the server that had a 30K. So the server disconnected, something happened with it, got the server error message, and in less than 3 minutes, the server recovered itself. I was just at the time flying around Microtech, just kind of enjoying a little bit of low flying in my A1, and then it just died. Less than 3 minutes, it was back up. I was still where I was. Nothing had changed. The only thing is the game paused. It let us know there was a server error. And then at the end of that time, less than 3 minutes, it was back up again. I was still flying. I was still carrying my momentum and everything like that. I was still in the same spot. There were some minor bugs here and there that happened. And of course, there's going to be people reporting that, including myself. And it's just minor stuff. Really nothing that I could tell major broke on it. And everybody else in the chat was also saying that nothing seemed to have been majorly broken. It was just minor bugs here and there. So overall, that's phenomenal. That's fantastic. It's good to hear that that actually worked out well. And we recovered perfectly fine. And apparently it did not affect anybody in Pyro. They didn't even notice any issues whatsoever because, again, it's a separate server. And I'm assuming that's good for CIG. That's what they want. They don't want a 30K server to somehow bring down another server. And so, yeah, that was really, really good. But overall, I would describe my experience as being largely uneventful, which I think is exactly what CIG probably wants. It's nothing glamorous about it, folks. It's literally just Stanton that we all know and love, but with server meshing, and CIG was just there to monitor the data coming in and to kind of figure out what they're going to do next after this playtest. And yeah, it was just business as usual, really not much to write home about. But again, like I said, that is a huge positive. So that then begs the question, what would the next test be? My guess is maybe they're going to do some bug fixing and then run the same test again and kind of gather that data. One of the things, like I said, the jump points were non-functional in this build, so we were not able to transition between Stanton and Pyro. Indeed, there were, in the patch notes, they were mentioning don't go to the jump points and don't engage with them because they could actually brick people's accounts, forcing them to relog to get back into the game. So there's definitely a huge game-breaking bug if you try to interact with the jump gates. So my assumption is they're probably going to fix probably some of the smaller stuff, maybe then take the next step of actually allowing us to use the jump points. So that'd be quite interesting, right? Because it's one thing to have two servers running side by side, right? That's one thing. Seems like that was a huge success. I don't know if they still think they need more data or not, but the next logical thing would be then to have servers communicate and allow players to transition between them, right? That is a huge step. How do you do the handshake process of having one player go from Stanton to Pyro and Pyro to Stanton without completely bricking everything in the process, right? And I mean, of course, that's the issue they have right now, so they got to work that out. So hopefully by the next test, maybe they will have that up. And of course, I will be here to relay my thoughts and opinions on that and let you guys know how that went. But yeah, overall, that's all I have to write home about. It was a very simple test. It seemed to be very successful and it worked out really well. And I was genuinely pleased because, like I said, my expectations were pretty low. I had the full expectation that this was going to fall apart because it was a huge milestone and it was the first time, right? It was a huge milestone, first time testing it out. So as an Evocati, and many of you I'm sure who watch are also Evocati are very aware that our initial builds are not for the faint of heart. I know a lot of people want to understand what the experience of being Evocati is. It is not for the faint of heart. It is absolutely, it could be an absolute slog. And if you already don't like bugs in Star Citizen, trust me, you would not like an Evocati experience because it tends to be extremely buggy, far more than what you guys see. We see a lot of horrific stuff that even doesn't make it into the live builds because, of course, our testing helps to reproduce some of the major issues before it goes to the wider PTU, which then gets reproduced with a larger scale of players. And then eventually most of that gets hammered out. Of course, not everything gets fixed in time. That's just the nature of the way Star Citizen is. A lot of moving parts means things are going to break. But ultimately, when we get these early builds, yeah, they tend to be just utterly trash. Either in server performance or features missing or incomplete or things having issues like that. A whole manner of things. But we do it because we want to help improve that early spot for the game. And then when it eventually goes into your guys' hands, most of the bugs hopefully are dealt with. Obviously, that's not always going to be the case, but at least it helps QA identify the biggest problems that they can then relay to the development team, and then they can, of course, go and start triaging those issues. So yeah, let's hope that CIG got a lot of positive information on this test. I do hope that they are going to kind of explain how things are going, both within the development of server meshing and also in terms of how things work or what they plan on doing going forward and how the data is looking, right? Now, I have no idea if they intend on doing that, but I would really love to. And if not, at least a post-mortem of this battery of tests, right? I would love to see them kind of break down what they came across, what their conclusions were, what they plan on doing. But the ball's in their court on that one, whether they decide to do that or not. All right, folks, that's it for me today, talking about my experience with the static server meshing playtest on the tech preview. If you did indeed enjoy my thoughts and opinions on this brand new, innovative, and Herculean tech coming in to Star Citizen, please leave a like as it really does help out the channel. And of course, if you want to see more videos like this and much more down the line, be sure to subscribe as well. But until next time, fly safe, and I'll see you all in the black.